Hey everybody, it's Adrian. If you watched my first FilaBlend Color Lab video, you may remember that I experienced some fairly significant variances in the diameter of the filament, and I received my second month's, and there were still pretty good variances in it again. Just for reference, on this one, for the first month, it was from 1.49 to 1.87 millimeters, so pretty significant. Excuse me. So I went ahead and I contacted FilaBlend, and a gentleman named Robert responded to me and asked if I'd give them a couple days to look into it. So then about 2 days later, I received another email from him, and it had some really good information in it explaining kind of what was going on and some of the challenges that they faced, and I thought it was good information that I'd share with everyone. So first thing though is that Robert agreed the variance was definitely excessive and was beyond their standard, and he actually said they traced this one back to the machine that it was produced on and actually have taken that machine offline to look at it and make adjustments. So I thought that was pretty good to hear that from them. So there were really three main points that Robert had, and really they all made sense to me and really explained kind of what was going on. The first was that you have to understand that they're feeding three different colored materials into whatever their machine is or looks like, and it was kind of interesting because I kind of wondered how they did produce this filament. And so if you think about it, if you're feeding three filaments into a machine, and each of those feed materials is going to have a different variance in itself. So let's say that you just happen to have a 0.3 millimeter variance, 0.03, not 0.3, 0.03 millimeter variance, and let's say that those all happen to kind of sync up at the same time. So you effectively have 0.09 millimeters of variance going into the machine. And that made a lot of sense to me. So basically, just depending on the material going into the machine is going to really have an impact on the variance in the filament. And he was saying that it takes some operator skill to account for that and make adjustments and keep it going. He actually said that he was the one that was actually responsible for doing the black, white, and red. There again, that just comes down to the person making the filament. This is like a kind of a specialty filament. It's a unique filament that they do. So there's going to be some different things to consider and different things that come into play in producing a filament like this. The next thing that he mentioned was that the Color Lab products, which is their monthly subscription, that says in general they're going to have a larger tolerance than their regular product line, just because these tend to be their new colors. These aren't the standard production ones. These are ones that they're trying out, different color combinations with to see what they look like and all that. So they're not as familiar with the material that's being input into this filament, and so it's a little bit harder for them to control. And there again, that makes sense also. The last thing was, he says that they discovered that their filament isn't perfectly round. He says during the manufacturing process, each color cools and contracts at a slightly different rate. When two colors meet, there's a pinching effect that occurs at the surface, not noticeable to the naked eye. And he gave attached a little picture that gave an illustration of it. And so what he's saying, so you're feeding three different filaments into a machine. They're being compressed into a roughly 1.75 millimeter piece of filament. But there again, no two filaments are always going to behave the same, just because of different additives in them and different things. Even among the same brand, if they're different colors, they can behave differently. So if they cool or contract at a different rate, basically it's a circle cut into three triangles. If this one cools a little slower, and this one cools faster, it's going to change the shape of the filament a little bit. And so I actually tested what he said. When I got these spools, the averages that I took were actually from about 20 different measurements. So I tried to make sure I took a lot of measurements at different places, but one thing I did never think to do was actually try measuring from different angles at the same spot. And so after reading Robert's email, I decided to try that, and let's just test it here. Like for instance, this is 1.79 this way. If I twist it, it's 1.63. And if I come back maybe this way a little bit, it's 1.72, 1.64. And so that illustrates exactly what Robert was talking about, that they found that their filament isn't quite round. That kind of explains why I was getting such a wild variance. in the diameter is. So if you look at the volume of material, it's actually probably more consistent than my measurements made it seem like it was, because it's not exactly a round shape. He says that this is something that they try to account for, and basically these are just some of the challenges. You know, Robert wasn't making excuses. These are just some of the challenges that they face in producing a filament like this, which is understandable because it's a different product. You know, you're not just pouring, you know, pellets into a hopper. Well, I don't want to say just pouring. I'm not trying to oversimplify what manufacturers do, but basically for the more typical filaments, they're pouring pellets into a hopper and it's feeding through an extruder and it's coming out. With FilaBlend, apparently what they're doing is they're taking 3 input materials and feeding those in and heating them inside something to merge them into a tricolored filament. So it's definitely a different technique, different process, and so it's going to have its own unique challenges. So I really appreciated the information that Robert gave me. I thought it was some good insight into FilaBlend, and it helped me to better understand kind of what I was seeing with the filament. It also helps explain how the filament, for what I thought was such a wild variance, is still able to print so nicely, and that's because the volume of the filament being extruded was probably a little bit more consistent than I believed it was from the measurements. So something I found interesting. Hopefully you guys found that interesting too. Alright, so that about covers it. If anyone has any comments, post them down below, or if you have any questions for FilaBlend, if you don't feel like contacting them, you can post them down there and I'll follow up with Robert and see what we can find out. If you like the video, hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe, and happy printing.